Kelvin was always up for an adventure. At just 28 years old, the young businessman had already traveled to many exciting places. He loved the thrill of exploring the unknown, and when his friends invited him on a private yacht trip along the West African coast, he said yes without hesitation. The journey started perfectly. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, and the ocean sparkled like it was full of diamonds. Kelvin leaned on the yacht's railing, enjoying the cool sea breeze on his face. His friends joked and laughed around him, everyone relaxed and carefree. But by the afternoon, things started to change. Dark clouds rolled in from the horizon, slowly swallowing the blue sky. The wind picked up and soon the calm sea turned into a swirling, restless beast. Kelvin's smile faded as the yacht began to rock on the growing waves. "Looks like a storm is coming," one of his friends said nervously. Before anyone could react, the storm hit. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, soaking everyone in seconds. Thunder boomed so loud that it seemed to shake the sky, and flashes of lightning lit up the dark, angry clouds. The yacht was tossed around like a toy in a bathtub, and Kelvin struggled to hold onto the railing. "Everyone hold on!" the captain shouted, trying to steer the boat through the raging storm. Kelvin's heart pounded as another giant wave slammed into the side of the yacht. Then the worst happened. A massive wave rose like a mountain, crashing over the deck and sweeping Kelvin off his feet. He tried to grab onto something, anything, but the water was too strong. He was thrown into the cold, wild sea. His friends' shouts were quickly drowned out by the roaring wind and waves. Kelvin struggled to keep his head above water, gasping for air as wave after wave crashed over him. His arms and legs ached, but the ocean didn't care. It tossed him around like a rag doll until finally, everything went dark. Kelvin woke up coughing, his lungs burning as he spat out salty water. He felt sand under his hands and the warmth of the sun on his back. His head throbbed and his whole body ached, but he was alive. Slowly, he pushed himself up and blinked at his surroundings. He was on a beach, a beautiful one. The sand was white and soft, stretching out in both directions. The ocean he'd fought against earlier was now calm, its waves gently lapping at the shore as if nothing had happened. Behind him, a dense forest loomed, its tall palm trees swaying slightly in the breeze. The air smelled of salt and something sweet like tropical flowers. But something felt off. Kelvin scanned the horizon. There was no sign of the yacht, no wreckage, and no other survivors. He called out, his voice hoarse. "Hello, is anyone there?" Only the sound of the waves answered him. Panic rose in his chest. Where was he? How far from civilization? Taking a deep breath, Kelvin tried to steady himself. He needed to figure out where he was and find help. His clothes were soaked and heavy, clinging to his skin, but he managed to stand up and look around. That's when he noticed the footprints. They were small and delicate, definitely not his. They led away from the beach and disappeared into the thick forest. Kelvin's mind raced. Someone was here, but who? And why hadn't they come to check on him? Cautiously, he followed the footprints, the soft sand giving way to firmer ground as he entered the forest. The air inside was cooler, shaded by the canopy of trees, but it felt heavier too, almost suffocating. The deeper he went, the quieter it got. The sounds of the ocean faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of birds. Kelvin had the strange sensation that he wasn't alone. Every so often he stopped and looked over his shoulder, certain he had heard a branch snap or seen movement in the shadows. But whenever he turned, there was nothing there. The footprints eventually led to a clearing, and Kelvin froze at what he saw. In front of him was a village, but it was unlike any he'd ever seen. The huts were small but neatly built, made from wood and thatch, and arranged in a circle around a central space. Smoke curled up from a few cooking fires, and colorful fabrics hung on lines strung between the huts. The village was alive with activity, but what struck Kelvin the most was that every single person he saw was a woman. They were everywhere, working in the gardens, carrying baskets of fruit, weaving mats and chatting in small groups. Some were laughing, others looked focused, but none of them seemed to notice him yet. Kelvin's heart pounded. Where were the men? And how would these women react to him? He was a stranger, and the only man in sight. Before he could figure out what to do, one of the women spotted him. Her eyes widened, and she said something in a language Kelvin didn't understand. Within seconds, more women turned to look, their expressions a mix of surprise, confusion, and suspicion. The quiet hum of the village came to a halt as the women gathered, whispering among themselves. Kelvin raised his hands, trying to appear non-threatening. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said, though he wasn't sure if they understood him. "I'm just lost. My boat. There was a storm." A tall woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was striking, with braided hair, sharp cheekbones, and an air of authority about her. She studied Kelvin with a look of cautious curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked in clear, accented English. Relieved to hear his own language, Kelvin stammered, "I'm Kelvin. I was on a boat, but there was a storm, and I ended up here. I don't even know where I am." The tall woman exchanged glances with some of the others. "You are on Umuagu," she said, her voice calm but firm, "a place where men do not belong." Kelvin blinked, unsure if he'd heard her right. "What do you mean, men don't belong?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she gestured for two younger women to step forward. They moved quickly, taking Kelvin by the arms, not roughly, but firmly enough that he knew he had no choice but to go with them. "Wait!" Kelvin protested, but the women didn't respond. They began leading him toward a large hut in the center of the village. The other women watched silently, their eyes fixed on him with a mix of fear, fascination, and something else he couldn't quite name. As he was led deeper into the village, Kelvin couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into a world completely different from anything he had ever known. A world with its own rules, secrets, and dangers. Kelvin was ushered into the largest hut in the village, flanked by the two women who had led him through the crowd. The air inside was cool and fragrant, filled with the earthy scent of dried herbs and burning incense. Kelvin's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he noticed the intricate carvings on the wooden walls. Symbols and patterns that seemed to tell stories he didn't understand. At the center of the hut, sitting on a finely woven mat surrounded by other women, was a woman whose presence commanded immediate respect. She had an aura of authority that filled the room, her posture straight and her expression calm but piercing. She wore a colorful wrap of deep blues and golds, with a crown-like headpiece made of woven palm fronds and decorated with polished shells. This was Queen Adugo, the leader of Umuagu. The queen regarded Kelvin with sharp, calculating eyes, her expression unreadable. Around her sat a group of older women, each with their own air of wisdom and experience. These women, Kelvin realized, must be her council, advisors who helped her govern the village. The two women who had escorted Kelvin bowed their heads and stepped aside, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the room. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft rustle of the queen's robes as she shifted slightly. "I was told your name is Kelvin," Queen Adugo finally said, her voice smooth and steady. "You have found yourself in a place unlike any you have known. This is Umuagu, a place where no man has set foot in many years." Kelvin swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "Your Majesty," he said hesitantly, "I didn't mean to come here. There was a storm, and I was thrown overboard. I had no idea this island even existed." Queen Adugo's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at one of her council members, an older woman with streaks of silver in her hair who nodded subtly. The queen returned her gaze to Kelvin. "You are here now," Queen Adugo said, her tone calm but firm. "And your presence here is troubling." Kelvin frowned, his curiosity growing despite his fear. "Why? What do you mean by men do not belong here?" Queen Adugo's eyes narrowed slightly. "You will understand what you need to in time. For now, it is enough that you know this. Umuagu is a sanctuary. Your presence disturbs its balance." Her words left Kelvin with more questions than answers. Why was this island so strictly separated from men? What had happened here? He opened his mouth to ask more, but the queen raised a hand, silencing him. "Perhaps you are different," she continued, her voice measured. but we cannot ignore the rules that have kept this place strong for generations. Your arrival has unsettled many." One of the councilwomen spoke up, her voice calm but decisive. "Queen Adugo, the rules are clear. No man may remain on this island. He must leave." Another councilwoman, younger but equally composed, added, "But the storm brought him here. It was not his doing. Perhaps there is a reason for his presence." The queen raised her hand again, silencing the discussion. "Enough," she said. "We will not act in haste. We will observe him for now and decide what is to be done." Kelvin exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He wasn't entirely sure what "observe" meant, but it sounded better than being cast out immediately. Queen Adugo's voice softened, though her eyes remained sharp. "Kelvin, you may stay in the village for now, but under strict conditions. You will not wander unaccompanied. You will follow our rules and you will show respect to the women of Umwagu. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Kelvin replied, his voice steady despite the nervous knot in his stomach. The queen nodded and gestured to one of the younger councilwomen who stepped forward. "This is Adana," Queen Adugo said. "She will ensure you understand our ways. You will answer to her." Kelvin turned to Adana, a tall, graceful, and strikingly beautiful woman with thoughtful eyes and a quiet strength about her. She regarded him with a mix of curiosity and caution, but her nod was polite. "Come with me," Adana said simply. As Kelvin followed her out of the hut, he could feel the weight of 100 eyes watching him. The women of the village stood in small groups, whispering and staring as he passed. Some looked wary, others openly curious. Kelvin's mind raced with questions, but for now, he kept them to himself. He had stepped into a world unlike anything he had ever known, a world with its own rules, its own history, and its own secrets. And as he followed Adana through the village, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had only just scratched the surface of the mystery that was Umwagu. Kelvin sat under the shade of a tall palm tree near one of the village's communal spaces, staring at the horizon where the ocean met the sky. The clear, unbroken view was beautiful, but it only made him feel more isolated. He longed for the sounds and sights of the modern world, things he had taken for granted. He had been given his own small hut close to Adana's. He closed his eyes and imagined the hum of a city, the glow of streetlights, and the buzz of his phone in his pocket. He missed his TV, the comfort of binge-watching his favorite shows, and even the arguments he'd have with his friends about sports. But most of all, he missed the connection to the outside world. Kelvin's heart sank as he thought about how long it would take for anyone to realize he was missing, if they even noticed at all. He had no close family. His parents had passed away when he was young, leaving him an orphan. His ex-girlfriend, who might have cared once, was long gone from his life. The thought struck him hard. Maybe no one would even know he was gone. The sound of laughter pulled Kelvin from his thoughts. A group of women passed by, carrying baskets of fruit balanced effortlessly on their heads. They smiled and waved to each other, their voices light and cheerful. It amazed him how the women of Umwagu seemed to thrive without the conveniences he had always relied on. As the day wore on, Kelvin began to see more of the village's daily life. The women moved with a sense of purpose and harmony. Some worked in gardens, tending to rows of healthy crops. Others sat together, weaving colorful fabrics or repairing fishing nets. Children ran around laughing, playing games that seemed both familiar and strange. Everything was done as a collective effort, and Kelvin couldn't help but notice how smoothly things seemed to run. It wasn't long before Adana appeared, her quiet but commanding presence drawing his attention. "You've been sitting here for a while," she said, her tone neutral. "If you're going to stay here, you might as well learn how we live." Kelvin nodded, standing up. "I'd like that," he said, though he wasn't sure how useful he could be in a place like this. Adana led him to a group of younger women who were preparing food. They had gathered around a large wooden table, cutting fruits and grinding herbs. Their chatter stopped as soon as Kelvin approached. He felt their eyes on him, a mix of curiosity and nervousness. "This is Kelvin," Adana said simply. He'll be helping us today." One of the younger women, a teenager with wide, curious eyes, whispered something to her friend, and they both giggled. Kelvin offered an awkward smile. What can I do to help?" Adana handed him a knife and pointed to a pile of fruits. "Start with these. Cut them into small pieces." Kelvin sat down and got to work. It wasn't long before his lack of experience showed. The knife slipped, and a piece of fruit squirted juice into his eye. He winced, dropping the knife as the women burst into laughter. "You've never done this before, have you?" one of them teased, her tone light and playful. "Not exactly," Kelvin admitted, rubbing his eye. "I usually just buy pre-cut fruit at the store." The women exchanged confused looks. "Pre-cut? At a store?" one asked. Kelvin realized how strange his world must sound to them. "It's like a place where you can buy food and other things. We don't usually grow it ourselves." The women murmured among themselves, trying to imagine such a thing. Adana, standing nearby, gave Kelvin a small smile. "You'll learn," she said. "But here, we do everything ourselves." Over the next few days, Kelvin tried to immerse himself in the rhythm of life on Umuagu. He learned how to grind herbs with a heavy stone, fetch water from a nearby stream, and carry firewood without dropping it. It wasn't easy, and he often felt clumsy compared to the women who moved with practiced efficiency. At times, the younger women's curiosity about him was overwhelming. They asked him questions about his world, what life was like outside the island, what men were like, and why he wore such strange clothes. Kelvin did his best to answer, though some of their questions made him realize how little he truly understood about their lives in return. One afternoon, while carrying a basket of firewood back to the village, Kelvin stumbled and nearly fell. Adana, who had been walking ahead, turned back and helped him steady the basket. "You're improving," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Barely," Kelvin replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You all make this look easy." "It's not about ease," Adana said. "It's about necessity. We've learned to depend on ourselves because there's no one else to do it for us." Her words lingered with Kelvin. He couldn't help but admire the women's independence and strength, but he also wondered about what they had given up to live this way. Not everyone in the village was as accepting of him. Kelvin often caught women whispering as he passed by, their expressions guarded or even hostile. Some avoided him altogether, their disapproval clear. It was a reminder that his presence here was still an unwelcome disruption for many. One evening, Kelvin sat near the central fire pit, watching the flames dance as the village wound down for the day. Adana sat beside him, her expression thoughtful. "You miss your home," she said, breaking the silence. Kelvin nodded. "I do, but I don't think anyone's coming to find me." Adana didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard before. "This island is our home, and we have built a life here that works for us. But I understand what it means to long for something else." Kelvin looked at her, surprised by her openness. "Do you ever wonder what it's like out there, beyond Umuagu?" Adana hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. But wondering doesn't change the fact that this is where I belong." As the night deepened, Kelvin realized that despite their differences, he and Adana shared a strange connection. She was the first person on the island who had made him feel truly seen, not just as a man, but as someone who didn't quite fit in. The days on Umuagu turned into weeks, and while Kelvin had grown more accustomed to life on the island, he still felt like an outsider. He worked hard to pull his weight, learning to fish, gather firewood, and help prepare meals. But the tension in the village was undeniable. Every task, every gesture, every word seemed to be scrutinized by suspicious eyes. At first, Kelvin thought the hostility was harmless. He had laughed it off, believing that the women's mistrust of him was rooted in ignorance. What could they possibly do to him? They were just a group of women after all. But as time went on, he began to sense that their hostility ran deeper than simple wariness. There were whispers, sharp looks, and deliberate silences when he entered a space. It wasn't just dislike, it was anger. One morning, as Kelvin helped Adana carry baskets of harvested fruits back to the village, he overheard a group of women nearby. They weren't whispering this time. "Why is he still here?" one said, her voice dripping with disdain. "He doesn't belong." "He's a threat," another added, "a reminder of everything we left behind." Kelvin felt a chill run down his spine. A threat. How could they see him as dangerous? He was outnumbered and out of his element. But the women of Umuagu didn't seem to see it that way. They saw him as an intrusion, a disruption to their carefully balanced world. For the first time, Kelvin wondered if his life might actually be at risk. The only solace Kelvin found was in his growing friendship with Adana. Unlike the others, she didn't seem to judge him. If anything, she was the opposite, patient, thoughtful, and kind. They often worked together during the day, sharing quiet moments as they completed their tasks. One afternoon, while repairing a fishing net by the water, Kelvin told Adana about his life before the island. "I wasn't exactly someone people depended on," he admitted, tying a knot in the rope. "I didn't grow up with a family, so I've always had to figure things out on my own. I guess that's why I traveled so much. It was easier to keep moving than to stay in one place." Adana listened intently, her hands steady as she worked. "And now? Do you still feel that way?" Kelvin paused, looking out at the endless blue sea. "I don't know. Being here, it's different. It's forced me to slow down, to really look at my life and what's missing." Adana nodded thoughtfully. "The women here, we've learned to depend on each other, but it hasn't always been easy. I've always wondered what it would be like to know someone outside this world, to hear their stories, to see their perspective." Kelvin looked at her, his chest tightening. "I'm glad I met you, Adana. Even in this strange place, you've made me feel less alone." For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. It was more than just gratitude. It was a connection, something neither of them had felt before. That evening, as Kelvin carried water back from the stream, he was stopped by a group of women. Their expressions were cold, their body language tense. "Why are you still here?" one demanded, crossing her arms. "Haven't you done enough damage?" Kelvin froze, unsure of what to say. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," he said cautiously. "I'm just trying to help." "Help?" another woman scoffed. "We don't need your help. We've survived without men for generations, and will continue to do so." The anger in their voices made Kelvin's stomach twist. He tried to explain himself, but they weren't interested in hearing him out. The confrontation ended with one of the women shoving the bucket of water out of his hands, spilling it onto the ground. Adana found him later, sitting by the central fire, his head in his hands. She sat beside him without a word. "They're afraid," she said softly. "Not of you, but of what you represent. Men. They were the reason we became what we are today. Your presence reminds them of that pain." Kelvin sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to survive. But it feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough." Adana placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle. "You don't have to prove yourself to everyone. Not all of them will change their minds, but some will. And I see you, Kelvin. I see the man you are." Her words made his chest tighten. He turned to her, searching her face for any trace of doubt, but there was none. "You've been the only one who's made me feel welcome here," he said quietly. "I don't know how I would have managed without you." Adana's eyes softened. "Don't let their hostility get to you. I'll always be here for you no matter what." The air between them grew heavy with unspoken feelings. Kelvin hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. "You mean that?" Adana nodded, her gaze steady. "I do." In the stillness of the night, with the fire crackling softly beside them, Kelvin leaned closer. Adana didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head, meeting him halfway. Their lips touched in a kiss that was tender yet filled with unspoken passion. In that moment, the world around them faded away. The tension, the whispers, the danger. It was just the two of them, sharing something real and undeniable. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the palm trees, bathing the village in a golden light. Kelvin stirred from his restless sleep, his thoughts immediately going to the night before. His confession to Adana, the kiss they had shared by the fire. It all felt like a dream, yet it was undeniably real. He had wanted to leave the island as soon as he got here, but now he couldn't imagine his life without Adana. But the peace of the morning was short-lived. A loud drumbeat echoed through the village, startling Kelvin. He sat up, his heart racing. Women began to emerge from their huts, their expressions grim and purposeful. Adana appeared in the doorway of the hut where he had been staying, her face pale but resolute. "The Queen has called a meeting," she said quietly. "It's time." Kelvin's stomach churned. He had known this moment was coming, but he wasn't ready. "What do you think she's decided?" Adana hesitated, her gaze steady but somber. "We'll find out soon." The entire village had gathered in the central square, forming a large circle around the Queen's hut. At the center sat Queen Adugo, her regal presence commanding respect and silence. Her council of women flanked her, their expressions unreadable. Kelvin was brought forward, flanked by 2 guards. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder as he stepped into the circle. Some women whispered in anger, others in curiosity, their eyes fixed on him. Queen Adugo raised her hand, and the murmurs stopped. "Kelvin," she began, her voice calm but firm. "You have lived among us for weeks now, and the time has come to decide your fate. Your presence here has unsettled many, and the rules of Umwagu are clear. No man may remain on this island." Kelvin opened his mouth to speak, but Queen Adugo's sharp gaze silenced him. "However," she continued, "your actions have shown that you are not here to harm us. You have worked alongside our people, you have respected our ways, and yet your presence cannot be ignored." The Queen's words hung heavy in the air. Some women shouted their support for the Queen's decision to expel Kelvin. "He doesn't belong here!" one woman yelled. "He's a danger to everything we've built," another added. But not all voices were against him. A younger woman, her voice trembling but strong, called out, "He hasn't hurt anyone! Why should he be punished for something he didn't choose?" Queen Adugo silenced the crowd with a single raised hand. "Let us hear from those who have been closest to him," she said, her gaze falling on Adana. "Adana, step forward." Adana stepped into the circle, her head held high despite the weight of the moment. She looked at Queen Adugo, then at the gathered women, her voice steady as she began to speak. "I know many of you fear Kelvin's presence," she said. "I understand why. We have lived in peace for generations, free from the pain and destruction caused by men. But Kelvin is not like the men we remember. He has shown kindness, humility, and respect. He has not asked for anything more than the chance to survive." Her words caused a stir in the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others frowning in disapproval. Adana continued, her voice rising with emotion. "We speak of strength and unity, but is strength not also found in compassion, in understanding? Kelvin did not choose to come here, but now that he is here, I believe he was brought here for a reason, and he has worked hard to honor our way of life. I have seen his heart, and I know it is good." Tears glistened in the eyes of some women as Adana's words struck a chord. Others, however, remained unmoved. Queen Adugo's gaze softened slightly, but her expression remained stern. "You speak with passion, Adana. But do you forget the rules that have protected this island for so long? No man may stay." Adana took a deep breath, her voice trembling with resolve. "Then I will leave with him." A shocked gasp rippled through the crowd. Kelvin's heart sank as he realized what Adana was saying. She was willing to give up her home, her community, everything she had ever known for him. Queen Adugo's expression darkened. "You would abandon your people for this man? Life on the outside is not as simple as you think, and you might lose your life to the ocean." Adana met the Queen's gaze with unwavering determination. "I am not abandoning them. I am choosing love. I am choosing the possibility of a life beyond fear." For a long moment, there was silence. Queen Adugo studied Adana, then looked at Kelvin, her sharp eyes seeming to pierce through him. Finally, she spoke. "Adana, your loyalty to this man is clear," she said. "And while I do not agree with your choice, I will honor it. But know this, once you leave Umuagu, you can never return. The bond you share with this island will be severed." Adana's voice was steady, though tears shone in her eyes. "I understand, Your Majesty." Queen Adugo turned her gaze to Kelvin. "Kelvin, you have been given a gift that few men would ever receive. You will leave this island, but you will take with you the love and sacrifice of one of our own. Do not waste it." Kelvin's throat tightened as he struggled to find words. "Thank you," he managed. "I promise I won't." The Queen nodded once, then gestured for the guards to step back. "Prepare yourselves." That evening, as the village grew quiet, Kelvin and Adana sat together by the fire, their hands entwined. The weight of the day still hung over them, but there was also a sense of relief, a sense that they had chosen each other despite everything. "You didn't have to do this," Kelvin said, his voice soft. "You could have stayed." Adana shook her head. "I couldn't. Not without you. My place is with you now." Kelvin leaned closer, his gratitude and admiration for her overwhelming. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Adana. And you've shown me a world I never knew was possible," she replied, her voice full of love. In the glow of the firelight they kissed again, their love sealing the promise they had made to each other. The future was uncertain, but at that moment, they knew they would face it together. The days leading up to Kelvin and Adana's departure were filled with activities. Despite their initial hostility toward Kelvin, some of the women helped him prepare for the journey. Under the guidance of a skilled boatmaker, they worked tirelessly to construct a small but sturdy vessel. Kelvin, who had never built anything remotely like a boat before, took on every task they gave him with humility and determination. Adana worked alongside him, her hands calloused and her resolve unshakable. Though their departure was bittersweet, her presence at his side gave Kelvin strength. The boat gradually took shape, a symbol of both their escape and their bond. On the final day, the women of Umuagu gathered on the beach as the boat was completed. Its frame gleamed in the sunlight, polished smooth and lined with woven palm leaves for shade. Supplies were carefully packed on board: dried fruits, fish, fresh water, and simple tools for survival. As Kelvin and Adana stood before the boat, preparing to leave, even those who had once been hostile toward Kelvin seemed softened, their faces reflecting a mixture of sadness and acceptance. Queen Adugo stood at the front of the gathered women, her regal composure intact, but her voice softer than Kelvin had ever heard. "Kelvin, Adana," she said, "your choice has been made and we honor it. Though you leave Umuagu, you carry with you the lessons of this land. Use them wisely." Kelvin nodded deeply, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will never forget what I've learned here." The Queen's gaze shifted to Adana. "Adana, you were born of this island, and though you leave its shores, you will always carry its spirit. Be strong, and may the goddess guide you both." Adana bowed her head. "Thank you, Queen Adugo. I will honor Umuagu in everything I do." A young woman who had worked alongside Kelvin during the boat building stepped forward hesitantly. "Kelvin," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I thought you didn't belong here. But I see now that you brought something we didn't expect, a chance for us to see things differently. I hope you find peace." Her words brought a lump to Kelvin's throat. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Your kindness means more to me than you know." As the goodbyes continued, a small girl tugged on Adana's hand, her eyes wide with tears. "Will you ever come back?" she asked in a tiny voice. Adana knelt down, her own eyes misty. "I can't, little one, but I'll carry all of you in my heart wherever I go." As the boat was pushed into the water, Kelvin turned back to take one last look at the island. The women stood in a line along the shore, their colorful wraps fluttering in the breeze. For a moment he was overwhelmed by the life he was leaving behind, the harmony, the strength, the unwavering sense of purpose that defined Umuagu. In the weeks he had spent on the island, Kelvin had learned more about life and community than he ever had in his life. The women of Umuagu, despite their initial hostility, had shown him a way of life built on independence and cooperation. They didn't just survive, they thrived, without the trappings of modern technology or the distractions of the outside world. He thought about how he had once dismissed them as primitive, unable to imagine how they lived without phones, TVs, or machines. Now he realized how small his perspective had been. The women had created something rare and beautiful, and he was grateful to have been a part of it, even for a short time. "Maybe I survived the storm for a reason," Kelvin said aloud, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Adana, seated beside him, turned to him with a soft smile. "What do you mean?" Kelvin shrugged, his gaze still on the receding island. "I've spent my whole life running, never staying in one place long enough to really understand it. Maybe the storm brought me here to teach me something I didn't even know I needed." Adana reached out, taking his hand. "Then let's honor that lesson, together." As Kelvin and Adana sailed into the open sea, the gentle rhythm of the waves filled the silence between them. Kelvin sat at the bow of the small boat, his mind turning over the events of the past weeks. There was a question burning in his mind, one he hadn't dared to ask before. He turned to Adana, who was seated beside him, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of water. "Adana," he began hesitantly, "why were there no men on the island? What happened to them?" Adana looked at him, her expression thoughtful. She remained silent for a moment, as if weighing whether to answer. Then she sighed and turned her eyes back to the horizon. "The story of why there are no men on Umwagu is an old one," she said softly. "It's not something we talk about openly, but since we are leaving, you deserve to know." Kelvin nodded, leaning closer to listen. The seriousness in her tone made him brace himself. "Long ago," Adana began, "the island was not just home to women. Men lived there too, and the village was a thriving community with families and children. It was a place of peace, much like you've seen, at least at first." Kelvin watched her face as she spoke. Her voice carried a mix of sadness and resolve, as if the story was both a burden and a truth she had learned to accept. But over time, things began to change. The men, they became greedy, power-hungry, and cruel. They believed their strength gave them the right to dominate with cruelty, and they used it to control the women. Slowly, the harmony of the village was destroyed. The women were treated like property, their voices silenced, their freedom taken away. Kelvin felt a pang of anger at the thought. "That's terrible," he murmured. "What did the women do?" "At first they tried to resist," Adana continued. "But the men were relentless. They took control of everything. Decisions about the land, the food, even the elders who had guided the community for generations. The island began to suffer. Crops failed, sickness spread, and what was once a place of peace turned into a place of misery." She paused, her voice dropping to a somber note. "One day, the men went too far. There was an event, a tragedy that pushed the women to their breaking point. They prayed to the goddess Ace, the protector of our island, begging for a way to save their people." Kelvin leaned forward, captivated. "And the goddess answered?" Adana nodded. "One night she appeared to the village leaders in a vision. She gave them a choice: allow the men to continue their rule and watch the island be destroyed, or remove all the men and restore balance to the land." Kelvin's brow furrowed. "Remove them? How?" Adana's expression turned solemn. "The goddess cast a spell, one that caused all the men to be taken by the sea. They were swept away to distant lands, never to return. From that day on, no man has been able to set foot on Umwagu without upsetting the balance. The island's survival depends on it." Kelvin sat in stunned silence, letting her words sink in. The story explained so much: the women's initial hostility, the strict rules, even Queen Adugo's reluctance to let him stay. "So that's why you were all so wary of me," he said finally. Adana nodded. "You were an exception, Kelvin. The goddess didn't send you to us like she sent the others away. You came by accident, but the rules are still the same. No man can stay on Umwagu." Kelvin frowned. "But I wasn't like them. I wasn't trying to take over or hurt anyone." Adana's voice softened. "I know. But for the women of Umwagu, the scars of the past run deep. It's not just about what the men did. It's about what their presence could bring back. The balance is fragile." Kelvin stared at the water, his thoughts swirling. He finally understood why the women had built their lives the way they had. Why they had chosen independence, strength, and unity over anything else. It wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming their identity and their peace. Kelvin had been pondering another question as they sailed away from Adana. If there have been no men on the island for decades, how do the women, how do they reproduce? How is the village still full of young women? Amara smiled, understanding his confusion. That's a question I expected from you. The island has its secrets, and reproduction is one of the most mysterious aspects. The goddess Ace didn't just protect the island from the men's greed, she also made sure life could continue without them. Kelvin's curiosity deepened. What do you mean? There's a sacred ritual, Amara explained. It happens once a year, during a special festival called the Ulochi. On the night of the festival, women who wish to bear children go to the sacred grove, a place deep within the island's forest that is forbidden at all other times. It's believed that the goddess herself blesses those who are ready to become mothers. Kelvin frowned, still not fully grasping the idea. But how? Adana continued, her tone soft. The goddess gives life directly to those women. It's not like how it works in the outside world with men. It's purely a gift from the goddess, a divine blessing. The women who attend the ritual often return home pregnant, and months later, they give birth to healthy children, always girls. Kelvin was stunned. So there haven't been any boys born on the island? Adana shook her head. No. The island has been home to only women for as long as anyone can remember. Every girl born here is raised knowing her role in the community, and the cycle continues. It's all part of the goddess's plan. Kelvin marveled at the idea. In the outside world, men and women had their traditional roles. But here, women carried everything: leadership, family, reproduction, all without men. But what about love? Kelvin asked after a pause. Do the women ever long for companionship, for something like what we have? Adana's face softened. Some do. Some of the younger women, like me, wonder about what life would be like with a partner, someone to share burdens and joys with. But for most of the women in East, the sisterhood is enough. They have family, community, and purpose, and that's what keeps the island strong. Kelvin nodded, understanding more with each word. So the women have found a way to thrive on their own, guided by the goddess. Adana smiled, reaching out to take his hand. Yes, and now we'll have to find our own way to thrive too. Together. As the boat rocked gently on the waves, Kelvin couldn't help but think about his own life. He had always seen himself as independent, but his independence had been selfish, a way to avoid pain, to keep people at arm's length. The women of Umuagu had shown him a different kind of independence, one built on community. Maybe I survived the storm for a reason, he said aloud, his voice thoughtful. Adana turned to him, her expression curious. What do you mean? Kelvin shrugged. I've spent so much of my life running from things, commitments, relationships, even myself. But being on Umuagu forced me to stop, to face who I am and what I've been missing. Adana smiled, reaching out to take his hand. Then maybe the goddess wanted you to learn something. Kelvin squeezed her hand gently. Maybe she wanted both of us to. The open sea stretched endlessly before them, the rhythm of the waves a soothing yet persistent reminder of the unknown ahead. Kelvin sat at the edge of the boat, staring at the horizon. But his thoughts were elsewhere. Back on Umuagu, back to the women who had embraced a way of life so foreign to him, yet so deeply meaningful. Adana sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. She had been quiet for most of the journey, sensing the storm brewing in Kelvin's mind. You're troubled, she said softly, breaking the silence. Kelvin nodded, his jaw tight. Adana, what if I wasn't supposed to leave, at least not like this? She frowned, tilting her head. What do you mean? He turned to her, his gaze intense. The storm, finding the island, meeting you. It all feels like it wasn't random. Like there's a reason I survived and ended up there. And now, leaving, it feels like I'm running from something important. Adana's expression was conflicted. But we made our choice, Kelvin. There's no going back. Once someone leaves Umuagu, they can never return. Kelvin finished, his voice steady. But what if I wasn't meant to leave in the first place? Adana's eyes widened. What are you saying? Kelvin took her hands in his. I have to go back to the sacred grove. I need answers, Adana. I need to understand why this all happened. The island came into view as the boat turned back toward its shores. Adana's heart pounded as they drew closer, an inexplicable heaviness settling over her. She had left Umwagu willingly, knowing the rules, but the idea of returning filled her with unease. When they reached the shore, Kelvin jumped out of the boat, pulling it onto the sand. He turned to Adana, holding out his hand to help her out. But she didn't move. Kelvin, she said, her voice trembling. I can't. What do you mean? He asked, confused. Adana stepped back, her face pale. I can't set foot on the island. I feel something holding me back. It's like the island itself won't let me return. Kelvin's heart sank as he realized the truth. The spiritual forces that protected Umwagu weren't just myths. They were real, and they were enforcing the rules. He nodded slowly, understanding what this meant. Wait here, he said. I'll go alone. Kelvin walked through the familiar forest, the trees towering above him like silent sentinels. The air felt heavier than before, charged with a sense of purpose he couldn't quite explain. He followed the path to the sacred grove, a place he had only heard whispers about during his time on the island. The grove was breathtaking. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy. In the center was a large stone altar, adorned with symbols and carvings that seemed ancient and sacred. Kelvin felt a chill run down his spine as he approached it. He knelt before the altar, his hands trembling. Goddess Ace, he began, his voice uncertain. I don't know if you can hear me, but I need to speak to you. The air around him seemed to grow still, as if the forest itself was listening. I've seen what you've created here, he continued. The strength, the harmony, the independence of the women of Umwagu. It's incredible. I understand why you made the choices you did. The men who once lived here didn't deserve this place. His voice faltered, but he pressed on. But what about now? The world has changed, and I believe that men and women can find a way to coexist in peace. I'm not asking you to change everything, only to consider the possibility of balance, a way for both men and women to thrive together. Kelvin's words echoed in the stillness, and he waited, his heart pounding. But the grove remained silent. No divine voice answered, no sign appeared. He closed his eyes, tears brimming. If I was meant to find this place, to meet Adana, to learn what I've learned, please, show me the way forward. Still, nothing. Kelvin rose slowly, his legs shaky. The silence of the grove felt deafening, but he understood its meaning. The goddess wasn't going to answer, not because she didn't care, but because the answers weren't hers to give. They were his to find. He made his way back to the village, where the women greeted him with a mix of surprise and wariness. Word of his return spread quickly, and soon he was standing before Queen Adugo once more. The queen's expression was unreadable, her gaze piercing. Kelvin, she said, her tone measured. You left. Why have you come back? Kelvin took a deep breath. I came back because I needed to understand. I needed to know why I was brought here, why the goddess allowed me to find this place. Queen Adugo's lips pressed into a thin line. And did you find your answer? Kelvin hesitated. Not from the goddess. But I think the answer lies in what I've learned here. You and the women of Umwagu have built something extraordinary, something I've never seen before. But I also believe there's more to this story. Balance isn't just about separation. It's about finding a way to live together. The queen studied him for a long moment. You speak of balance, but balance has cost us greatly. The wounds of the past are deep, Kelvin. What makes you think they can be healed? Kelvin looked her in the eye, his voice steady. Because people like Adana exist. People who are willing to leave behind everything they know for the possibility of love, for the chance to create something new. Queen Adugo's expression softened slightly, though her authority remained. You are bold, Kelvin. Perhaps too bold. But the goddess has allowed you to return, and that speaks for itself. What do you intend to do now? Kelvin thought for a moment before replying. I intend to honor the sacrifices that have been made here, to carry the lessons of Umwagu with me wherever I go, and to live in a way that would make this place proud. As Kelvin stood before Queen Adugo, the weight of his purpose pressed on his chest. The women of Umwagu had gathered behind him in the village square, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and quiet anticipation. Kelvin knew he was asking for something that challenged the very foundation of their lives, but he also knew it was necessary. Your Majesty, Kelvin continued, his voice steady, I understand the rules of Umwagu, and I respect the balance you've worked so hard to preserve. But if men are not to return to this island, then surely the women who live here should have the choice to leave if they wish. Queen Adugo's gaze hardened, but she remained silent, letting him speak. I'm not asking you to change the island's ways, he continued. I'm only asking that every woman here be given a chance to choose her own path, whether it's staying here or seeing the world beyond these shores. The Queen's Council murmured among themselves, some clearly displeased. One of the elder women stood and spoke sharply. And what would happen to those who leave, Kelvin? They would abandon the traditions that have kept us strong. They would lose everything. Kelvin turned to the crowd, his voice rising with emotion. But what if they gain something greater? What if they find love, freedom, or a new way to contribute to the world? Shouldn't they at least have the chance to decide for themselves? Queen Adugo raised her hand, silencing the murmurs. She studied Kelvin carefully, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she spoke. You ask for a great deal, Kelvin. But I see no harm in letting my people hear your words. Speak to them. Let them decide. Kelvin stood before the gathered women. He could see their doubt, their fear, but also their curiosity. He took a deep breath and began. When I first came here, I didn't understand your ways, he said. I thought you were primitive because you didn't have the things I took for granted. Technology, cities, convenience. But I was wrong. What you've built here is extraordinary. You've created a world of strength, harmony, and independence. The women listened intently, some nodding in agreement. But the world outside is not all bad, Kelvin continued. There is beauty out there too. There are places where men and women work together, where love and family thrive. It's not perfect, but it's worth exploring. And I believe that every one of you deserves the chance to see it for yourself if you want to. A younger woman named Naya stepped forward, her brow furrowed in thought. But we've been told that the outside world is dangerous, that men will only hurt us. Kelvin met her gaze. There are dangers, yes, but there's also kindness, hope, and opportunity. I'm not saying it will be easy, but isn't it worth finding out for yourself? Another young woman, Ifunanya, spoke up. What would we even do out there? We don't know anything about the outside world. You know more than you think, Kelvin replied. You're strong, resourceful, and intelligent. The skills you've learned here, farming, crafting, healing, are valuable everywhere. The world could learn a lot from you. Conversations rippled through the village. Younger women gathered in small groups, debating, questioning, and imagining what life beyond Umwagu might look like. Naya and Ifunanya became vocal leaders, their excitement infectious as they spoke about the possibility of exploring new horizons. Not everyone was supportive. Some of the elder women voiced their disapproval, warning of the dangers of abandoning their traditions. But the seeds of curiosity had been planted, and for many, there was no turning back. Kelvin spent his time answering questions, sharing stories of the outside world, and listening to the women's hopes and fears. On the morning of their departure, a small group of women stood with Kelvin and Adana on the beach. Naya, Ifunanya, and 3 others had made the decision to leave, their faces a mixture of determination and nervous excitement. Each carried a small bundle of belongings and wore expressions that spoke of hope and courage. Queen Adugo and her council watched from a distance, their expressions solemn. Though they hadn't agreed with Kelvin's ideas, they had allowed the women to make their choice. Kelvin turned to the Queen, bowing deeply. "Thank you for giving them this chance, Your Majesty. I hope they make you proud." Queen Adugo's voice was steady but tinged with emotion. "The path ahead will not be easy, Kelvin. Take care of them. And remember, wherever you go, you carry the spirit of Umuagu with you." Kelvin nodded. "I won't forget." The boat was pushed into the water, and Kelvin helped the women climb aboard. Adana was the last to step in, her hand lingering in his as they shared a quiet moment of understanding. As the boat drifted away from the shore, the women on the beach raised their hands in farewell. Kelvin felt a lump in his throat as he watched the island grow smaller in the distance. He knew this was not just the end of one journey, it was the beginning of a new one. Sailing into the open sea, Kelvin sat with the women who had chosen to follow him. They shared stories, laughter, and dreams of the future. Each of them carried the hope of building a life where love, freedom, and individuality could thrive. Adana leaned against Kelvin, her voice soft but confident. "Do you think we'll find it? The balance you talked about?" Kelvin wrapped an arm around her, gazing at the horizon. "I don't know, but together we'll create it." As the boat sailed toward the unknown, Kelvin, Adana, and the brave women of Umuagu embraced the promise of a future shaped by courage, love, and possibility.